Hi there, in this episode we're going to look at the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights is an addition to the Constitution, and it comes a few years after the Constitution is written. The whole point of the Bill of Rights is to protect individual freedoms, and it is basically a compromise is why it's added. When the Constitution is written, it does nothing to protect individual rights. Each state had a state constitution, and in those state constitutions, rights are protected, but there was nothing at the federal level. And when the Constitution is being debated, whether or not it should be ratified or not, a whole group of people see a problem with the federal Constitution not protecting individual rights. That group becomes known as the Anti-Federalists. In their point of view, we had just fought a war against Great Britain to earn rights and freedoms. And they saw the lack of those protection of those individual rights as a really big problem with the Constitution. So in order to get them to sign on, it's going to be added as a compromise. Now, the Bill of Rights goes about protecting two big main ideas. I mean, it has other things as well, but most importantly are the right of political expression, your freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, your freedom to petition the government and to assemble and protest. All of these are in the First Amendment. Other rights are when you're accused of a crime. So the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments all have to do with protection if you are charged with a crime by the government. Now let's take another look at the First Amendment. Most people would dare say that the First Amendment by far is the most important. You need to realize it protects 5 different freedoms. Your freedom of speech, your freedom of the press, which is the media. Today that includes music and the internet. Your freedom of religion, your freedom, your right to assemble, which is to peacefully protest, and your right to petition. You can send a letter, you can send correspondence to the government with requests. All of those make up your First Amendment rights. Now, the First Amendment has been expanded greatly over time, and there have been several court cases that have been taken to the Supreme Court, and these court cases are what have extended the rights of American citizens. So, for example, when it comes to religion, in Wisconsin versus Yoder, which was back in 1972, the Supreme Court found that if you're Amish, if that is your religion, that you do not have to follow the state law that says that you go to school until the age of 16. That was an infringement on their religious beliefs. And as a result, the Amish family won that case. Another example is speech. We will spend lots and lots of time talking about this in class, but one example is Yates versus the U.S. And it basically says that you can have radical speech, speech against the government, speech that's not necessarily politically correct. And as long as it does not present a clear and present danger, then it's free speech. What we mean by a clear and present danger is you can't say something that's going to lead to an incident. So the usual example of that, of clear and present danger, is yelling fire in a crowded movie theater. If you yell fire and there's a stampede and somebody gets hurt, you're responsible for that. Next up is the press. An example of a case that involves the press in the First Amendment is the New York Times versus Sullivan. In this case, the First Amendment was upheld, and that publications of all statements can be published, even if they're false, if it's not done on purpose. So it really upholds the freedom of the press. Peacefully assembly, even groups like the Ku Klux Klan have the right to peacefully demonstrate, even if it's going to lead to other people acting in a violent outburst. Petition of the government. This one is an interesting case because it had to do with the military. In Brown versus Gilnes, it was ruled that military staff actually have to request permission to petition members of Congress. And the reason behind that is because as a member of the military, you're upholding the Constitution, upholding those offices of Congress. So your rights aren't exactly the same as if you were just your average citizen. Okay, next up is the due process rights and protections. These are what we mean by due process is about the rule of law that we've talked about. Everybody can have their day in court. So there are several different amendments that focus on the legal system and people's rights within the legal system. One of those rights is the right against cruel and unusual punishment. Now, here's the interesting thing. The death penalty has been upheld. So it is legal in some states where if you are convicted of certain crimes, you can face death as a penalty. The Supreme Court says that that's fine as long as it's not used in a discriminatory manner. So you can't use the death penalty because somebody is African American and a white person would get a lesser sentence. That was the key to this. The next step is the idea of double jeopardy. We're not talking about the game show on TV. This is the idea that a person cannot be tried twice for the same crime. So if you're put on trial for murder and the jury acquits you, it says you're innocent, the government cannot persecute you again. They cannot prosecute you. They cannot try to try you again. Once you're pronounced innocent, they cannot try again. Pleading the fifth. I'm sure you might have heard this on TV. This is the idea that a person doesn't have to testify against themselves. So if you're arrested, you do not have to answer the police officer's questions. If you're put on the witness stand in a trial, you do not have to incriminate yourself. They cannot force you to confess to your crimes. Next up is the right to counsel. This is your right to have a lawyer. Even if you cannot afford a lawyer has to be provided for you in the case of a criminal charge. Search and seizure. This is the idea that a person is protected from unreasonable search and seizure. They can't just pull you over and search your car without reason. And then lastly, we have trial by jury. Criminal defendants are guaranteed a trial by their peers, so people just like them. There are several other rights contained in the Constitution. One would be eminent domain. And this is more of a right of the government. The right of the government to put the public good, the common good, above individual goods. And that comes down to property. So let's say they're going to expand I-95 and put a new on or off ramp off. And where they happen to want to put that new ramp is right in your backyard. The government has the right to force you to sell that house to the government. That's eminent domain. Next up is equal protection under the law. This is going to be a later amendment. It comes after the Civil War. And it's this idea that any U.S. citizen should have the same rights under the Bill of Rights and under the Constitution. The right to bear arms. Of course, this is the idea that you can own and defend yourself, including guns. We have suffrage. Over the course of American history, more and more groups of people have been allowed to vote. And then lastly, we have enumerated rights. And this is the Ninth Amendment in the Bill of Rights. And basically what it says is that even though it's not listed specifically in the Bill of Rights, you still have that freedom, basically. So it's kind of like a loophole in that it protects Americans overall. Okay, that's it for this time. Have a good one.